Did you look at the stars with wonder in your eyes, imagining how it all could be?
Hello, my friends. I am here to share a Wednesday night story with you guys. And if you have been following along with our story this month, you probably already have a bit of an idea what it's going to be about today, because we are continuing our book called Gumtree, Gulley, and we are on chapter 4 this week. So there are 6 chapters, so we still have 2 more weeks left after this week. So we're getting close to the end. And if you have missed any of our chapters so far, you can go back and watch those videos from the past few weeks. But if you were watching last week, you will remember we left off in kind of a tough spot. Where were the animals last week when we left off? They were in a pretty scary situation, right? There was a big bushfire that had happened and they were trapped. And then that's where the story cut off and left us wondering, what's going to happen to all the animals? Are they going to be okay? So today, I'll give you guys a little hint and show you the name of this chapter. Name of the chapter is right here. It says, The Rescue. So that probably means something good, right? Let's see. Let's read this 4th chapter. A terrifying bushfire was burning through Gumtree Gulley. Every ridge surrounding the gully was alight, flames licking up the bush on all sides. The gully was cut off. The animals huddled in a clearing in the middle beside the creek, afraid to move and not sure what they should do. "Listen to that roar," said Bluey the possum, trembling, his eyes wide with terror. His young friend, Rocky the wallaby, said, "I never knew that a bushfire made so much noise." At that moment, Jacko the kookaburra flew back into the clearing and said, "I've had a look around and the flames are getting higher. They're leaping from treetop to treetop and they should be here before long." Sneaky the goanna began to panic, running back and forth, shouting, "What can we do? What can we do?" He stuck his head under a pile of dead leaves so that he couldn't see the approaching flames. Wise old Wombat shook his head and said, "I don't feel very wise now. I don't know what to do." Even sleepy old Curly the koala was wide awake and very worried. "But there must be something we can do," he kept saying. "There must be something." "Well, I'm staying here in the creek," said Paddle the platypus. "The creek will keep me safe." "And I'm flying off," said Jacko. "Sorry to leave you blokes in such a pickle, but I'm not staying here to be burned to death by the brush fire." With those words, he spread his large feathery wings and took off. But by now, thick clouds of gray smoke were filling the whole of Gumtree Gulley. In the thick gray smoke, Jacko lost his way and flew smack into the trunk of a tall river redgum. Feathers were knocked off the end of his wing and his wing muscles were bruised with the impact. There's a picture of Jacko, the bird, after he hit the tree and he's falling. Oh no. Trying again, he crashed heavily to the ground, one wing dragging behind him. With only one wing still working, Jacko flew around in circles in the dense smoke for several minutes before landing and then limping back into the clearing by the creek. Wise old Wombat examined the wing and said helpfully, "Those feathers will regrow in a week or 2, Jacko. Long before then, your wing muscles will heal. Don't worry, you should be able to fly again in no time." "What are you talking about, silly old Wombat?" squawked Jacko. "What do you mean in a week or 2? Long before then I'll be dead. Have you forgotten about the bushfire?" But the animals of Gumtree Gulley were not the only ones who knew about the bushfire. From his homestead, the ranger saw the smoke and sprang into action. Throwing some old sugar bags into the back of his truck, he drove to the point where the walking track into the gully began. There he stopped to soak the sugar bags in the creek water. After draping the wet bags over his head and shoulders, he ran at the wall of flames blocking the track into the gully. The ranger leapt over burning grass, dodged burning trees, and kept running. He ran through the blackened stumps of gum trees. Burning cinders drifted through the air and settled on his arms, legs, hair, and clothes. He brushed them off and kept on running, but each time he did so, he got burned. In the thick smoke, the ranger stumbled into rocks and bushes, which bruised him and scratched him. The smoke made it very hard to breathe, but he was determined not to give up. He was determined to find the animals of Gumtree Gulley and do his very best to rescue them. So here's a picture of the ranger. Wow, that looks kind of scary, doesn't it? He's jumping through the flames. A few minutes later, the ranger limped into the clearing by the creek where the animals were huddled. His hair and clothing were singed. There were burns on his arms and legs, and he was covered with scrapes and scratches from crashing through the rocks and bushes. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here, Ranger," said wise old Wombat. "What should we do?" asked Paddle the Platypus. "Should we all get in the creek where the water can protect us?" "No," said the ranger as he caught his breath. "The creek isn't safe. It's far too narrow, and there are tall gum trees on either side. As soon as they start to burn, they'll crash down into the creek. The best place for us is here in this clearing." But, squeaked young Bluey, "the clearing has thick grass and there are dead leaves all over the place. The ones you told us to clear away, but we didn't. Won't the clearing burn?" "Yes, it will," said the ranger firmly. "It will burn. We shall burn it." He raked together a pile of dead leaves into the center of the clearing and set a match to the leaves. The ranger and the animals stood back and watched the small fire he had lit burn outwards into an ever-widening circle. When it was wide enough, the ranger beat out the small flames, licking the grass with the sugar bags he carried. That left a large black circle of burnt grass. Because it had already been burned, the ranger knew it would not burn again when the bushfire arrived. "This is called backburning," he said to the animals. "It gives us a safe place to be while the bushfire burns around us." Then he soaked the sugar bags in water from the creek again and told the animals to gather right in the middle of the burnt patch and cover themselves with the wet bags. A few minutes later, the ranger and all the animals were huddled together under a pile of wet sugar bags, right in the center of the burnt ground. The bushfire got closer and the noise got louder. The heat was intense and the smoke made everyone cough and splutter. They could hear burning trees crashing down as the fire turned their trunks into ash. Some of those trees fell down over the creek, just as the ranger had said they would. But in the clearing, there was no fire because all the grass and dead leaves had already been burned. There was nothing left in that patch for the bushfire to burn, and so, at the edges of that patch of ground, the raging bushfire came to a halt. Finally, as the afternoon wore on, the bushfire burned itself out completely. The ranger, together with the animals of Gumtree Gulley, crept out from underneath the still damp sugar bags and looked at the ash and devastation around them. The wind sprang up and blew away the smoke. "Just look at that," said Rocky. "The whole gully has been burned black." "But we are all still alive," said Wombat, "and we must be thankful for that." "We're alive," said Bluey, "because the ranger came into the fire and saved us." Then Bluey turned and looked at the ranger. He was cut and bruised. There were great burns on his arms and legs, and he looked utterly exhausted. It cost him a great deal of pain to save us, thought Bluey to himself. In fact, he risked his very own life. Okay, so that's the end of that part of the story for today. So remember, every week we're thinking about what about this story reminds us something about our lives and about how God is watching over us and about God's relationship to us. So let's think about that for just a minute, okay? So what the ranger did to save the animals of Gumtree Gulley is a picture of what someone else did for us. Who does the ranger remind you of when he's saving the animals? Kind of reminds me of Jesus saving us. Does that remind you of Jesus at all? So while the ranger risked his life, Jesus actually lost his life to save ours. The ranger was cut and bruised and burned, but Jesus ended up with terrible scars on his hands and feet from being nailed to a cross. He died on that cross to save us. Because he is so loving, God did something remarkable to rescue us from the punishment we deserve. Many years ago, God sent his own son, Jesus, into the world. Jesus never said no to God the way we all have. He always did what God wanted him to do, and so he did not deserve to be punished like the rest of us. But Jesus was punished. He was killed on a cross. God loves us so much that he punished his own son, Jesus, instead of us. That means that we can be forgiven for saying no to God. We can now be welcomed into God's wonderful kingdom as his friends. The ranger used the fire to make the animals safe from fire. So remember when he burned the clearing, he said he was back burning, so he burned a little bit to save them from the big fire. So it is death that makes us safe from death. The death of Jesus makes us safe from the death that's racing towards all of us. And so here is a verse from John 3:16. Some of you might know this verse. It says, God so loved the world that he gave his only son so that everyone who trusts in him will have eternal life. And then 1 Peter 3:18 says, Christ died for sins once and for all. An innocent person died for the guilty to bring you to God. So, what do you guys think we're going to talk about next week? What do you think is going to happen next in the story? I don't know. I haven't read the next chapter yet, but I'm excited to see what happens. I hope you guys are enjoying this story. I know I am. Okay, so that is all that we have for today, and I think this is our last Wednesday in January, right? So we're coming up on February. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at church or seeing you guys soon somewhere else if I don't see you at church. And I'm thinking about you guys, praying for you, and I love you all. Bye, guys.
Did you know that he's the one